All right, we're going to get started here in just a second as people join. All right. We're going to get started here in just a second. Thanks so much for joining. Happy Friday to all of those who are joining live today. All right, just a few more here. Awesome. Thanks for joining. We're just letting people come in from the waiting room. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Today, we're going to be talking about explaining musician insurance to you like you're five. And this is presented by Insurance Canopy. We know that insurance isn't the most exciting part about being a musician. We totally understand that, but we do believe it is one of the most important things. And so, whether you're a famous DJ or you're just performing at a wedding or at a band, you kind of ask yourself, do I really need insurance, or what even is musician insurance? And that's exactly what we're going to break down today, in the most simple, straightforward possible ways, no jargon or anything like that. I'm Kyle. I'll be moderating today's session, and I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who knows this stuff inside and out, Miss Joanne Hammer, program manager and insurance expert at Insurance Canopy. As a reminder, nothing here should be construed as legal advice, and we always recommend that you reach out to an insurance professional for specific questions on your business or your profession. But we will be doing a live Q&A at the end of this session. So if you have any questions specific to you or what we talk about, just go ahead and drop those into that question box there at the bottom of the Zoom, and we'll try to get to them at the end. But with that, we'll jump in. Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, would you give us just a quick intro to yourself and some of your background in insurance?
Absolutely. I've been in insurance for over 25 years and with Insurance Canopy for 9, where our DJ and entertainer program, musician program lives. So this is one that's near and dear to my heart. I've been there since the beginning of this program, and I'm excited to share some insurance basics and some information
I
with
love
our
it.
musicians.
We were preparing for this, and Joanne really spent some time looking into this. So you guys are in for a treat, and some of those examples she's found and things like that. But let's dive into this the pure basics. Joanne, would you share us what is musician insurance? Like just kind of just a general overview of what does that mean?
Sure. So most basically, which is what we're here for, is to break this down. That protects you as the DJ, the musician, the band, kind of wherever you fit in this musician space. And it protects you from accidents to a third party and property damage. So a third party are people that are attending the venue where you're playing, any of your patrons, any people that are just there for your concert, there for your music. Those are your third party people. And then you have your property damage that happens at the venue, a bar, a wedding venue that you're playing at. If you were to happen to damage their property, those are the two most basic things that we're going to cover in insurance. And there's a lot that can be covered and will be covered. So we'll get into that a little bit more
Mhm.
as we kind of dig more into what insurance does and how it can help cover you.
No, I think that's great. And I was told this on I think you or perhaps CVL from your team shared this, but I always like to use this example of what is insurance. It's actually taking your risk and passing that risk off to somebody else, right? And so you decide how much insurance you want to carry by how much risk you'd like to transfer to somebody else. And in your case, the insurance carrier. So I always thought that was an interesting way to think of insurance is like, well, I don't want that risk, so I'd rather transfer that off. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
speaking of those different kinds of risks, let's kind of dive in a little bit deeper on like what types of policies are there within the musician insurance realm? Is it just one policy? Is there multiple types of policies? And then if we can talk through like what those different policies might cover.
Okay, so I think there are two main, and then we can get into some other types also, but it's your liability coverage. That's when somebody gets hurt because of your business operations, what you're doing. You have a wire that's strung across and not clearly taped down or out of the way. Your gear falls on somebody, damaging the venue, hurting someone. That's your liability insurance. And then you actually have another coverage, which is for your gear and equipment. So if your gear gets accidentally damaged, stolen, if there's a fire at a venue or where you store your gear, those are the two, I think, probably most important and the two most common types of insurance.
Interesting. And that's specific to musicians. So does insurance canopy kind of offer both of those in parallel all the time, or is it you can pick one or the other, or how does that work in
Yep.
selecting?
We offer the liability coverage. We offer it as an event, so you can buy it for each event you're going to or annually. And then you have the option when you purchase the annual coverage to add your equipment and gear to protect that also, so that you don't have the expense of replacing it if something does happen to your equipment.
Got it. So it's annual or event based, and then if you go with annual, you could really look at getting that gear coverage, which sounds like probably something most people would want, is that gear can be extremely expensive. Um, great. So we kind of talked about that third party liability, is that liability coverage, your gear. Is there any other policies that as a musician you might think of that you need? Um, you know, maybe I'm taking my car to a gig or anything like that. Is there any other policies that you might think of?
Absolutely. There's your commercial auto where you're driving a vehicle for a business reason. So that could be your gear in your auto. In an accident that you're at fault for, they could sue your band, your company, even under an auto policy. So I think that's very important. There's workers' compensation if you employ any stage hands, road hands, people, sometimes your bandmates if they're not part of the partnership and they are actually employees. And
Mhm.
then some very specific coverage that I think is more for that event space and your gigs. There's some event cancellation coverage or weather coverage. So, you're signed up for an event, you're planning to make this money for this gig, and a hurricane or a tornado comes through and the entire event is canceled, which means you're not able to perform at that gig and make that money. There's those type of coverages, which I think really help to protect your investment as a musician. We know that that equipment is expensive. Getting your name out there is very expensive. And so you want to protect what you've built into your business and your band and your DJ.
That makes total sense. And so I think kind of summarizing all of that, you've got your two main that you'd really look at, and then there's other add-ons as your business grows or has specific needs, right?
Correct.
And I think another thing I've learned in doing these webinars is you constantly want to speak to your uh, insurance professional about where you're at in your business or your growth as an artist, and if you're doing constant shows or you've added a car that a truck that you're hauling your gear in or things like that. It's always about reevaluating that and where is your business at today, and am I insuring it appropriately? I always thought was a great one.
Mhm.
So looking at those, I think the big question that most people on this call today are going to have is, when do I actually need to get this, right? As an artist, you go through such an evolution of sampling to your friends, then, doing small gigs and open mics, then working your way up before you're a global superstar. So when do you recommend, Joanne, like, when is the right time and when might I need to get insurance in the evolution of my artistry?
So I think the most common point for musicians to start looking at insurance is when I'm going to play one of these small gigs or a wedding or this event, and the venue that you're playing for or the city that you're playing in is requiring you to have insurance, and you
Mm,
have to prove to them that you have insurance. That's when I think it becomes musicians become aware of the need for insurance, because they're going to ask you for a certificate of insurance. That's a piece of paper that proves that you have insurance for your band if there are those injuries or property damage. So that's where I think it really starts. I don't know that that's where you should wait to buy insurance, but I think that's where it becomes the awareness happens.
mhm.
I think if you're starting to buy equipment and put yourself out there in marketing materials and things, maybe that's a point where even before you're really touring or having gigs, that it might be worth insuring some of your equipment and your business venture as a musician.
Yeah, when I was doing research for this, it kind of said essentially as you start to make money is really a
Correct.
great time, right? Because if you're a paid participant in some sort of event or at a venue, like you said, you're now a part of that ecosystem and that liability, that risk. You are part of the risk and you're susceptible to liability should anything bad happen. And I thought that was interesting. Speaking of kind of that working with venues, we actually had a question come through, and I think it's just the right time to bring it up. This person asks, and I think this is a great question for across the board. Some venues I perform at require a COI or certificate of insurance up front, but others don't. Which has me wondering, if I'm still covered at venues that do not require a certificate, or should I be getting a certificate for every venue I perform at? I think that's a great question, very relevant.
Yeah, I would suggest that you speak with the venue. If they're not requiring it, your insurance is still going to cover anything that you are held responsible for or become liable for because of your music, your gig. But you don't always have to add the venue as additional insured unless they specifically request it. Where it may help is that there's no decision once a claim comes in on whether the venue is covering it, you're covering it, if you're both participating in the claim. And so I think it helps to really get that clarification with your venue. But if you're unsure, add them as an additional insured. It generally doesn't cost much money, if any, to add an additional insured. And it gives you a little bit of an extra layer of protection and the venue. And I think another thing it does is elevate your status as a professional artist. You're serious about your craft and what you're doing. And I think that message comes through when you're willing to say, I would like to add you as an additional insured in case of anything that might happen that's my fault or becomes my liability.
Gotcha. But as long as you've got that annual liability policy, it sounds like even if they're not listed as additional insured, you're covered pretty much where you're performing.
Correct. Uh-huh.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So let's look at it, and you probably don't love to answer this one as an insurance professional, but on the kind of the negative side of it, is there any common exclusions that people think, well, I'm probably covered in my general liability or whatnot? Is there any exclusions that come to mind that really you want to warn people this is probably not covered under that, and you'd have to talk about either separate policies or just think of that as a true risk?
Right. With your gear and equipment, a
Hmm.
common one, wear and tear, negligence, purposeful damage to your equipment. You know, you got your
Guitar.
guitarist that exactly, that's a great example. So we're not going to cover things like that. That's almost always excluded from your coverage. Business vehicles are not covered under your liability, which is why you would want to consider that separate commercial auto policy. One that I have found really interesting is the copyright and trademark infringement and how important that can be when you might be playing other artists' music, um, or mixing music that maybe you don't own all the rights to. It's not original music. So that was something that I found very interesting, is that
Yeah,
that's not covered on your basic general liability policy.
really. Yeah, we were talking about this ahead of the webinar a little bit. You dug into this, and I think it's perfect transition into I was going to ask some of those real life scenarios. Will you dive in a little bit further to this? Because, musicians, they sample music, they play others' music. Tell us a little bit about that from a risk perspective.
Sure. So this, from the insurance point of view, comes in to sort of your professional liability realm. And the specific coverage is a media liability insurance. So when you play music, you have to have a very specific license to perform music publicly. This is something that I would assume that as musicians, you guys are a lot more familiar with than but I was really interested to find out that, you know, if I have my Apple Music that I pay a subscription for, it's a personal license. I can't play that music publicly, and I could be subject to fines and very large fines and lawsuits. So this was very fascinating to me. I found an instance where a private investigator was sent into a small bar, and he sat there for the evening and jotted down the songs that were played for his client. And the bar happened to, the DJ that was playing happened to play four of this person's songs that they didn't have the license to play. The bar and the DJ were fined $24,000 for one evening and four different songs. That just was mind blowing to me, that
No kidding.
something that seemingly innocent, I believe it was, could result in such a huge fine.
I found that so interesting. And again, the musicians on this call probably, are understand those nuances, but thinking about it from a risk perspective and insurance, that's like you said. So just to be clear, that probably wouldn't be covered or would be covered, or I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah, in a standard, your standard liability policy, your standard
Mhm.
musician, or basic maybe is a better word for that.
Mhm.
This is not going to be covered. It's a common exclusion in your
Gotcha.
general liability policies for people that are dealing with media, other people's music, other people's copyright, and their intellectual property. So yeah, this
Mhm.
is normally excluded, but there is insurance that you can cover yourself with.
That's interesting. I wanted to talk about, I know insurance canopy is kind of has all different types of policies for all different people. Is there a difference between a DJ policy or a solo perform, guitarist or a band? Are those different types of policies, and should you be kind of clear about what kind of art you're in when picking your insurance policy?
Yeah, the most important thing to think about is it just you? Are you a one-man band, a one-man DJ? Or are there multiple people that you wish to cover? Your bandmates, your stagehands, other people that are helping you bring equipment in and out. That's where you really get a difference. So if I'm just covering me, then that might be a little bit less expensive of an insurance, but also that coverage might be limited to just myself as the named insured or the person who purchased the policy and my name is on it. Once you get into, you're doing, you have the band, you have a couple of people that work for you, you can also become responsible for your band members'
Mhm.
liability, for your stagehands, hurting someone, dropping something. So that is the difference, is what you really need to think about. And I think where an insurance professional can really help you navigate some of those pitfalls, if you will, that, oh, I bought an insurance in my name, but we're this band of five people. You
Mhm.
want to make sure that your coverage includes all of those band members if there's not a formal business arrangement with all those band members. So something to really think about and be aware of, that, yeah, there can be two different types of coverage, and one is possibly that it's only going to cover yourself as the person that purchased.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And would it make sense to carry both at any point? If one for your band and then one for you if you're kind of performing side gigs and stuff like that?
Probably not. One
Oh.
is probably, or the other that is best suits your needs is going to cover you. But let's take the example that you are a band and you've got the band policy, but maybe you and your guitarist go and do an acoustic set somewhere. You're
Mhm.
going to be covered under that band policy. The two of you wouldn't have to buy a separate policy.
Mhm. Got it. I appreciate that because again, I don't really know this stuff, so I ask. So kind of looking at that, what if scenario. Do you have any, I think you're looking into this, shared obviously the copyright infringement one. Do you have any kind of real world examples of what musician insurance, where it might come into play for someone who needs it, or something that's happened, or any common misconceptions or stories?
Sure, let's look at a couple of claims that we have paid for our customers. We've had incidences where, let's say, a wedding band is playing for a wedding at a country club, and as they're bringing their equipment in, they've scratched up their entire ballroom floor with scratches across the floor. It has to be completely refinished. That's $35,000 when you have to strip a wood floor and bring it back to its, original condition. So that's something I don't know that you would think a few scratches could cost you $35,000 or more, depending on the size of the venue. So that's one very real world example. Another one that I think is probably the most common with our bands, our DJs, our musicians. We get those really eager dance guests, and sometimes, they've got a glass of champagne and they're cheersing, and it spills all over your equipment and you're ruined, or that really eager dancer that knocks over your speaker tower and it's broken. You can't use it, you can't finish the night, or you can't go to your set that's the next night. We pay for those damages, and that's what insurance is for. If you could go out, oh, my speakers were damaged, I can go out and purchase that new equipment so I don't have to cancel my next show and know that insurance is going to reimburse me or pay for those repairs or that new equipment. What great peace of mind. As a small business is essentially what our musicians are for the most part. And so,
Mhm.
not many of us can just run out and replace $50,000 worth of gear. That's what insurance is for, or pay that $35,000 claim for scratched floors.
No, I think that those are interesting examples that, I don't know, makes me want to, I'm not a musician, makes me want to get insurance. It's just knowing to protect yourself, right?
Right.
Well, all around this is very, very interesting, and we tried to give it to you guys as simple as possible. We've got a few questions we want to address, but I'm wondering, Joanne, before we jump into the questions, anything else that you might add to somebody who's either, again, trying to make it big? I mean, they all, you're artists, you're trying to. About musician insurance, maybe the importance, types of policies. Anything else you'd add?
So I do want to address a couple of, I think, maybe misconceptions that are out
Yeah.
there. And that is, my homeowner's insurance is going to cover my stuff. Most likely not. Most homeowners insurance policies do not cover any business ventures or your equipment related to your business ventures. Some do, so we can't say a blanket statement, but it is very rare that your homeowner's insurance is going to cover your gear. We kind of touched on this one a little bit, but will the venue's insurance cover me? Probably not. Their insurance is to cover them.
Mm,
If, say, someone sues because it's the venues, their steps aren't well maintained, and you just get named in the insurance lawsuit, or excuse me, the lawsuit because you're there, then the venue's insurance might step in, but that's because it's determined the liability is theirs. It's not truly that their insurance is covering you. And I think one more that I really want to touch on, and actually it comes into something that you mentioned earlier, is I play small gigs, or maybe I'm doing this for free just to really, get my name out there. You could get sued, someone could get injured even if you're not getting paid. So imagine
mm,
that's, kind of insult to injury. You're not getting paid, and now you're sued in a lawsuit and have to pay someone's medical bills because they tripped over your electrical cords. I do think there's a point where when you're playing in public, regardless of, if it's a paid gig or not, or a small gig or a large one, insurance is important. And that's, I think, where our event insurance comes in. It's a lot less expensive, very palatable for a small gig or a non-paid gig, but it really, the protection is, incredibly important to you as your business.
That's awesome. It's funny that you mention it because one of the questions I'm reading here was about doesn't my homeowner's insurance cover it? So that's good to
Perfect.
know, right? It's you got to think about those kinds of things. Well, this has been great. We've got a few questions I want to go through. If you've got anyone in the audience got some have some questions, drop them into that Q&A and we'll try to get to them here. But this first one I've got is interesting because we didn't address it here. When looking at Insurance Canopy's musicians policy, I was curious to know what personal and advertising injury covers and maybe doesn't cover. We didn't really talk about personal and advertising injury. Can you give us some background on that one?
Sure, personal and advertising injury is a section of your general liability insurance that actually generally does cover copyright and trademark. In
Mhm.
most musicians' policies, including ours, that is specifically excluded. But what it does cover you for is your advertising. So when you're out there on your social media platforms and talking about a gig or a venue, if you happen to accidentally or maybe intentionally slander a venue, another musician, something like that, it can help protect you for lawsuits for things like that. So libel, slander, where it's different from most general liability policies is that your copyright and trademark infringement is excluded out of that coverage.
Interesting. And we have another question that maybe this relates to. Is there any type of coverage to protect me from getting sued for anything I post online?
Yep. So that would be part of that personal and advertising injury.
Interesting.
So that is, but it does depend again, because are you getting sued because you used someone else's music without the proper licensing? That wouldn't be covered, but are you being sued, because of slander or libel? That would. So that one is a pretty fine line that may be hard to give a blanket answer to. It will certainly depend on the circumstances, but there is coverage for those things. And, as I said, there are some add-on coverages that aren't in a basic general liability policy to help with those coverages.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, thank you for that question. Got another one here. Do I need to submit a log of my equipment up front in order for it to be covered?
So for insurance canopy, we don't require that. You pick the limit that you want to cover. And then at the time of the claim, which is important, you have to prove that you owned that equipment and that you've replaced it in order for the insurance to respond to it. So we make it a little bit easier for you to get that equipment or get that equipment coverage up front, because no, we're not going to ask for your list of your guitars and their serial numbers and your amps and all that. We just need the general amount you want to cover, but that can come into play. You'll want to have all those records in the event there is a claim.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Um, so this one might be a little bit tricky and might be a specific situation, so I don't know if you can answer it, but they ask, what if I lent my gear to a friend? Is my gear still covered?
It can be. I
I
hate when
figured.
that's the answer is maybe. But
Yeah, go
it
ahead.
could be the responsibility of your friends, depending on the circumstances of that being lent. It's in their care, so they were responsible for the damage. But it could be covered under your policy. Again, it's one of those that the circumstances would really dictate how the coverage responds.
Makes sense. And I kind of figured that it was very specific. But good to know, right? That when you insure your car and you let someone else drive, it's the most of the time you're still covered, things like that. It's probably situational. This person asks, I play gigs in multiple states. Do I need to do anything special to be covered while traveling?
The only thing in that situation, I highly recommend our annual policy. Our event policy is very specific to the one event that you're playing,
Mhm.
where your annual policy, it follows you around. The territory coverage is the entire United States. And so you don't have to worry that if you cross the state line to play a great gig, you're still covered. Your insurance will follow you.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, that's actually most of our questions for this one. We really appreciate everyone taking the time on this Friday to join us, or if you're watching it later, we hope you found it informative. Thank you, Joanne, for doing the research and putting this together. And thank you to Insurance Canopy for hosting us. They've got a whole suite of musician insurance policies, and of course, reach out to them to talk about your specific situation to make sure that you're passing off that risk appropriately. And thanks again, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.